Hi, I'm Amber Stewart. I was fortunate enough to be born into affluence. I didn't immediately notice it. You might assume that everyone lives the way you do if you're born into affluence. The Stewart Pharmaceuticals chain of pharmacies was the biggest in our family's state. It was more than a company. It was the lasting legacy of my grandfather. He created it out of thin air, and my dad, David, inherited it when I was a little boy. The company became an integral part of my dad's identity. After a long day at the office, he would come home to our enormous Victorian home, remove his pricey tie, and immediately begin discussing profit margins, all without even saying hello. During dinner, Dad would remark, "Another record quarter," as my mother, Margaret, nodded in agreement and adjusted her pearl necklace. I intend to leave this to my children when the time comes. James, my older brother, would aimlessly move his food around the plate while we were talking. He was still more concerned with ancient civilizations than commercial margins, even if I was still playing with dolls at the age of 12. He would attempt to redirect the conversation by bringing up his most recent backyard archaeological find, but Dad would simply brush it off. I stood out, though. As a little girl, I used to adore assisting customers at the pharmacy. I could recite our inventory like the alphabet and knew the names of all our regular customers by the time I was 14 years old. Dad took note. When I'd brag about assisting an elderly customer in finding the correct medication or coming up with a creative display arrangement that boosted sales, he'd say, "Now that's my girl." Her smile would be contagious. She was born into the business world. There was a slow but steady change. Dad began taking me to business meetings as James dove more into history books and archaeological journals. I was working with basic accounting and conducting inventory counts by the time I was 16. "Observe and absorb, Abigail," my dad would instruct me as he showed me how to examine legal documents. "The day will come when this is all yours." Even my mom was overjoyed. On my birthday, Mother would give me pricey business outfits and cheap history books, saying, "Finally, someone to carry on the family tradition properly," while James would get nothing but cheap books. The day James told me he was majoring in archaeology in university is still fresh in my mind. Our formal dining room with its crystal chandelier that cost more than most automobiles was the perfect setting for our dinner. "Ure!" As his fork clattered across the delicate porcelain, Dad lost it. "My son will not squander his life working in the dirt." "Excuse me, David," even though she tried to reassure him, Mom's expression betrayed her agreement with him. "It's my passion, Dad," James whispered. His voice was severe but unwavering. "Professor Anderson has acknowledged my potential, and I have already received admission to the program." "Could we end up impoverished?" "Dad," he said, "we're not dirt scholars, we're business people." A look of unwavering resolve crossed James's face as I watched him make up his mind. He got up from the table and remarked, "Then I suppose I'm not a business person." That night was the turning point. My dad is focused on me and expects nothing less. Stewart Pharmaceuticals saw me as more than simply a backup plan. I represented their future. I reveled in the strong strain. Well, I had the impression that I did. With its illustrious reputation, fierce competition, and abundance of other trust fund kids like me, Preston Business College lived up to all my fantasies. Dressed in my finest and with my platinum credit card, I felt completely at ease. When I met Zane, that was it. Strangest of all, it was at the university library. As I muttered under my breath at my laptop, the fellow at the adjacent table caught wind of my coding assignment woes. As he sank onto the chair adjacent to mine, he said, "Need some assistance." He possessed an accent I couldn't quite place and the most amiable brown eyes I'd ever laid eyes on. That was the beginning. Amazingly, Zane nailed it. Because of his exceptional academic performance, he was awarded a full scholarship to pursue computer science. He was famous. Teachers would often cite his work as an example, and classmates would vie for his participation in class projects. Still, he kept his modesty in check. A total of 3 coffee study sessions passed before I mustered the nerve to inquire about his background. His parents immigrated from Syria when he was a little boy. He informed me matter-of-factly that his dad worked security and his mom cleaned houses. He taught himself to code on a used laptop when he was 12 years old. After school, he used to perform freelance work, he added. Had to pitch in to pay the bills. Let you know. Actually, I had no idea. Bills had never been an issue for me before. The fact that he stated it without showing any signs of self-pity further added to my admiration for him. A month after that, we began dating. Zane stood apart from the other wealthy lads I had known since childhood, not because he felt pressured to from his etiquette training, but because he was naturally courteous. He opened doors. He always took me to charming, locally owned eateries where the proprietors knew his name and served me delectable, homemade meals. He proposed after 6 months, not with a huge diamond as my parents would have hoped, but with a plain silver band that he had saved up for, which he presented to me on a twilight stroll around campus. Oh, it was just ideal. When I originally told my dad I was engaged, he was overjoyed. In order to meet my fiancé, he promptly organized a large family dinner and invited all of our relatives. He seemed to be fantasizing about the next generation of owners of Fortune 500 companies. I was immediately proven incorrect as soon as we entered our expansive dining room. As if someone had flicked a switch, I saw my loved one's expressions go from enthusiastic smiles to barely hidden sneers. Patricia, my aunt, did in fact clasp her pearls. Halfway to her mouth, Mom's champagne glass froze. Until Dad cleared his throat, the sound reverberated through our enormous dining room like a gunshot. The silence was oppressive. Just under the table, I could feel Zane tightening his grip on my hand. With the same condescending tone he typically used when speaking to his employees, Dad said, "So, young man," as if he were speaking to a kid. "Begin by introducing yourself. Tell me, where are you originally from?" In spite of the harsh environment, Zane straightened himself and sat up taller. His ability to maintain a calm and polite tone was admirable. "When I was a little boy, my parents left Syria for a new country, sir. Since I was 6 years old, we had been here." "So, what are your parents' occupations?" With a tiny curve of his lip, Dad pressed. His visage was made to look almost menacing by the sharp shadows thrown by the crystal chandelier over us. "My dad is a security guard at Atlantic Corp, and my mom is a cleaner," Zane said truthfully, his voice still proud and strong. "Since I was old enough to work part-time, I've helped support my family. However, I was really lucky to receive a full scholarship to attend Preston." My mom gulped down her water glass in a panic after she nearly choked on her wine. Each swallow caused the pearls on her neck to quiver. Uncle George and Aunt Patricia locked eyes, and Cousin Rebecca smirked under her manicured hand. The redness on Dad's face was growing faster and faster. The vein on his forehead, which would only show itself when his anger levels were really high, started to beat. "I hope you understand, young man, that my Ambar is accustomed to a certain lifestyle," he added, forcefully pushing his plate aside until the pricey china rattled. "Nothing has ever been lacking in her life. Just how are you going to support her?" Zane quietly responded before I could interject. My father's escalating wrath was in sharp contrast to his composed demeanor. "The cryptocurrency markets are already a lucrative business for me, Mr. Stewart. In addition to my extensive portfolio, I am currently working on the blueprints for my very own tech firm. Digital money." Suddenly, Dad burst out laughing so hard that it resounded across the mahogany-paneled room. "You mean, like, the thing that con artist who emptied Aunt Martha's savings account sold her?" The disdain in his words was palpable. "My God, that's totally different." With a racing heart, I attempted to clarify. "When it comes to blockchain technology, Zane is actually very well versed. Even tech conferences have requested his speech. My word, the crystal glasses rattled and the cutlery jumped as Dad slapped his palm on the table. Zane was the only one at the table who didn't flinch at the sound. "When I see a con man, I know it," Dad spat out. "And your Aunt Martha also believed she was wiser, didn't she?" "Mr. Stewart," Zane tried to explain, keeping his cool as my father's expression darkened. "I know you're worried, but I promise." "No, you're missing the point." The sound of my dad's chair screeching on the wooden floor irritated my teeth as he stood up. With his palms firmly planted on the white tablecloth, he towered over the table. "My daughter would be better off without you. You came from humble beginnings as a migrant. You have no concept of what it means to live by our principles. You don't belong here." My father, the one who instilled in me a respect for hard work and integrity in the workplace, revealed his true colors, and I watched in horror. Seeing my relatives nod in agreement as if he were merely expressing their collective thoughts was the most upsetting aspect. "Not yet, Dad." A furious expression crossed his face as he pointed his finger at Zane. "You are aware that I am able to see through you. It seems like you're simply another manipulative individual attempting to gain access to my daughter's inheritance." Mom interjected, "David, please," but she wasn't trying to protect Zane. She shifted her gaze to me, likely assuming a maternal stance. "My darling, you are not yet of marriageable age. Get a degree first. Join us at the company for the upcoming workday. Consider getting married to someone more appropriate. Plenty of time." Uncle George coughed nervously. "David, I think he's aiming straight for the pharmacy chain. In that regard, these folks are quite astute. Are you the same Martinez boy who dated Rebecca briefly?" Patricia then joined in, ignoring Zane while she spoke about him. "Very same thing. Everything is charming until they achieve their goal." As my relatives persisted in their verbal abuse, I observed Zane's expression. Even though he maintained an attitude of composure and sat motionless, I could see the tense muscles around his eyes and the whitening of his knuckles as he tightly grasped his water glass. "What sort of future do you think you could provide her?" Father scowled. "Waste time on your imaginary internet money while living in some tiny apartment, eating microwave dinners." There it was. A part of me suddenly cracked. My chair slammed backwards as I rose to my feet so swiftly. "Make a change. Please, everyone, just stop." Anger was trembling in my voice. "Your actions are disheartening. You're behaving like condescending, biased snobs." "Abigail," it exclaimed. Mom clenched her pearls in a gasp. "No, ma'am. I am through." I extended my hand toward Zane's. "Presently, I feel more ashamed to be a member of this family than at any time in my whole life. Zane, hurry up. We're going somewhere." We advanced confidently toward the entrance as my relatives murmured and spoke in hushed tones behind us. In the lobby, Dad's voice echoed as we retrieved our outerwear. "Abigail, you will come to deeply regret leaving that room with him. Am I being heard? You are obligated to repay us for all that we have done for you, the time and money we have spent on your education and your future." Meeting his angry stare, I turned around for the last time. "The only thing I should have done instead of telling you how I really feel about you right now is to just walk away." I didn't turn around as we hurried to Zane's car, but I could hear him yelling about responsibilities and payments. It became clear to me that some debts weren't worth paying back. The passing of a year seems surreal. Upon graduating from college, Zane received the highest honors in computer science, while I earned a degree in business. We were happy in our little flat, even if my family was worried. I sobbed uncontrollably when Zane proposed that we skip the wedding and tie the knot that summer. Making the ideal social media wedding announcement took me hours of work. I shared a touching remark about love's ability to overcome obstacles beside a stunning engagement photo of the two of us. The replies began to pour in almost instantly. "No, congrats." Attacks. Your continued involvement with that fortune hunter is unbelievable. My cousin Rebecca said, "You can't have me." Aunt Patricia, I can't imagine how disappointed your folks must be. We expected better from you as a child. According to Uncle George, no respectable Stewart would go to this abomination. The notifications on my phone continued to ring, and they were getting progressively more nasty. When my mother's comment showed up, I had no choice but to turn it off. This is going to be the most disastrous decision you ever make. We won't be present. That night, Zane held me as I sobbed for hours, whispering that we could delay, that maybe they simply needed more time. I had had enough of waiting for my family to improve. "No," I said while running cold tears from my eyes. "They can stay or they can go. We're still getting married." James showing up was a surprise. And significant dig in Egypt, something about a tomb that had not been found before, was underway when my brother was in the midst of it. His arrival at our flat, however, was greeted with a smile and a covering of desert dust 2 days prior to the wedding. Do you honestly believe I would not attend the wedding of my younger sister? As he drew me into a bare embrace, he spoke. "I mean, come on, you're going to need a bridesmaid, right?" Despite its modest size, the wedding was stunning. We set it up in a garden where the trees were adorned with fairy lights. On one side of the aisle stood Zane's kind family, who had welcomed me into their home from the very beginning and made me feel at home. James and a couple of distant relatives who had the gall to resist the family boycott were the only people on my side, and it hurt like hell. 1 year elapsed. I had launched my own small business consulting as Zane's IT career was booming. With no assistance from the Stewart fortune, we were constructing our lives together, brick by brick. After then, the invite arrived. "It is respectfully requested that you attend the celebration of David Stewart's 60th birthday." As I read it, my hand trembled. Were they prepared to end their animosity after all this time? After I presented it to Zane, he gave me a firm squeeze. "It's up to you, my darling," he whispered gently, "but we will confront it as a team, no matter what you choose." We sported our finest attire for the evening's celebration. A rare first edition of my father's favorite business book was the ideal present that I laboriously selected. Some indication that my recollection and concern were not forgotten. I was a frightened wreck when we stepped foot in that old mansion. Upon our arrival, the room grew hushed, mirroring the atmosphere of that initial dinner. I continued nevertheless. I timidly handed my father the meticulously wrapped package. The exquisite paper crumpled as it fell on the other presents, but he paid it no mind. He simply picked it up and threw it aside as trash. The beginning of the meal was like a well-staged performance of brutality. There was an intentional attempt to hurt with every inquiry and remark. As my relatives took turns trying to demoralize my spouse, I beheld their anguish with horror. "Are you still wasting your internet money, or have you landed a real job yet?" Uncle George asked with a drawl, while he swirled his pricey wine. Aunt Patricia interrupted Zane before he could respond. "Excuse me, but could you tell me which fork is best for salad?" As she nudged my cousin, Rebecca, she giggled. "Seems like these fancy dinners aren't your usual fare." My mom made the pointed observation, with a mischievous grin, that the suit you're wearing is really plain. I take it that high-end brands are out of your price range. "Have you ever had truffle before tonight?" Cousin Rebecca said. "You are aware that they are somewhat pricey." In spite of their treatment of Zane like a circus freak, I saw his expression stay straight. Even though he didn't inherit his success, he had worked his way up the ladder and acquired the respect of his peers in the software industry. Now they were treating him like dirt. When my dad lifted his glass, I lost it. "You know," he said to the table in a voice that hushed the room, "I often wondered what would happen to my daughter if she married beneath her rank. Does she long for her shopping sprees and credit cards, or have you saved enough from your video games to provide her the life she deserves?" I felt a sudden jolt of anger. My chair tipped over as I leaped to my feet. How outrageous! My body trembled with anger. Sitting here in your extravagant attire and enormous mansion, you pretend to be superior to everyone else, but in reality, you're just a bunch of little, nasty people who have never worked a day in your lives to earn anything. Every sound faded out of the room. Think having money makes you deserving. Observe each other. You've all lost touch with humanity because you're too busy flaunting your wealth. A flush developed on Dad's face. Like me, he got to his feet and stood up. Enough with it. Your lack of thanks, bad decisions, and defense of this fortune chaser have finally reached their breaking point. He pivoted to confront the table, his voice growing increasingly agitated. I want to be really transparent with you. I am no longer considered Ambar Stewart to be my daughter. She has been totally and utterly disinherited. Subsequently, he made an expressive gesture at my cousin Michael, who had been discreetly strutting across the table. This is my new heir apparent, my nephew, who appreciates the significance of lineage, custom, and upholding our norms. Michael stepped up and bowed slightly as the relatives erupted into applause. Uncle David, I am grateful. I will not disappoint you in the way that some others have. I glanced around the table at the individuals I'd before referred to my family. I was clapping passionately for my replacement as I looked at my mom. Looking down on my cousins, a smug expression on his face. Looking at my relatives, they nodded in agreement as they saw my public shame. As I grasped my husband's hand, I urged him, "Come on, Zane. It's finished, permanently." Time flew by in the years that followed. The cryptocurrency investments that Zane had made were merely the initial step. He started his own software company with that money and came up with creative AI solutions for companies. Tech Vision Enterprises reached a valuation of over $500 million in just 3 years. My father's derided internet money had become an empire all its own. My husband's accolades started trickling into business and tech publications, and I couldn't help but feel a surge of pride whenever I saw his name. 30 under 30, most innovative CEO, tech visionary of the year. The praise continued to pour in. I was most pleased by the fact that he remained the same after achieving success. Simple clothes, now tastefully costly rather than inexpensive, were still his style, and he still remembered everyone's name and opened doors for them. I wished I could track down my dad and prove to him how mistaken he had been by showing him these news articles. Still, it had been a while since our horrible birthday meal, and I must admit that I had taken solace in our lack of communication. The invitation followed. You are cordially invited to celebrate the wedding of Rebecca Stewart. Perplexed, I gazed at the thick cream envelope. We were now extended an invitation to her wedding by the same cousin who had teased Zane about his attire and table manners. I held out the invitation and remarked to Zane, "Look what came in the mail." That night, his kind eyes, which I had fallen in love with years ago, met mine as he read it attentively. Perhaps we ought to leave. No matter how much they hurt us, my family is sacrosanct to my culture. And thus it came to pass that we were making our way into the Ritz-Carlton ballroom, the site of Rebecca's wedding. It was a surprising response. "Oh my God, is that Zane Hassan, the Tech Vision CEO? Did you see his interview in Tech Weekly? I already just closed a deal with Microsoft. Can I get a picture with you, Mr. Hassan?" Those very relatives who had previously scorned my poor immigrant husband were suddenly swarming around him, trying to win him over. People who had previously panned him were now ardent admirers who begged for pictures, pushed business cards into his hands, and sought his investment advice. As usual, Zane handled the situation with his trademark poise, smiling for photos and answering questions with elegance. He managed to make everyone feel heard and valued, even those who had never treated him nice before. Even though she had teased him about his dining manners in the past, Aunt Patricia now said, "Your husband is absolutely brilliant. Did you know he was featured in Forbes?" Life can be so hilarious, I thought, and grinned. The fortune hunter they had deposed had amassed a fortune much beyond the Stuarts' wildest dreams. He, however, displayed his accomplishment with modesty and generosity in contrast to them. When my parents hurried over to sit down at our table, I should have sensed something was wrong. Mom put on her most charming smile, the one she saves for rich investors, and Dad put on his most businesslike expression. "My darling," Mom whispered as she kissed my cheeks absent-mindedly, "we have been keeping up with the press coverage of your phenomenal achievement, Zane. To have you as family makes me very proud." I just couldn't resist. "Is that so? That poor immigrant from a few years ago that you were so uncomfortable with?" Despite a little flinch, they swiftly got back up. Dad loosened his collar, which wasn't from his typical high-end brand, and cleared his throat. "My darling, it's all in the past now. My family is my family, isn't it?" Then the true cause of their abrupt decision-making process became apparent. The tale unfolded amidst the wedding appetizers. Stewart Pharmaceuticals was on the verge of collapse because to Michael, their prized replacement heir, his drive to save money led him to negotiate contracts with questionable vendors. The sale of fake pharmaceuticals had put them in the middle of a number of litigation. "The FDA is investigating?" whispered Dad. "We are immune to the bank's action. It's getting worse for us, Princess. Legal fees in and of themselves." Using a napkin, Mom wiped her eyes. "We've had to mortgage everything." Dad put his hand on Zane's as he reached across the table. "I get that we didn't get off to the best start, but you're family, and that's what matters most. A short-term loan will do the trick. A couple of million should be enough." It was as if Zane's expression softened with empathy. My ever-forgiving husband was on the verge of pulling out his checkbook. I stopped him by putting my hand over his. I restated the phrase, "family helps family," in a distant tone. "You mentioned that we weren't family anymore, which is funny because I remember that. Did you not disown me twice, actually?" Now, Abigail, my father's voice reverted to the parental admonition I remembered from my youth. "After all we've done for you?" I interrupted him and said, "You shared some wisdom with me, Dad. For example, you shouldn't hand out cash to complete strangers. Hasn't that been your stance the whole time?" He exhibited the well-known purple tint in his face. "You ungrateful little—" Just as the wedding DJ urged guests to raise their glasses in celebration of the happy couple, I spoke up again, this time emphasizing the need of maintaining high standards. "So, I'm sorry, but I don't associate with people who sell fake medications to sick people just to save a buck." In a fit of ecstasy, Dad sprung to his feet. "You are very bold. In light of all that I have done for you, including raising and educating you." "And disowned me," I concluded, maintaining my composure. "The number 2. This time let's do it 3 times. No matter how many times you try to disavow me, my answer will remain unchanged." We left the reception holding hands, my father's curses still lingering from when we were younger. I was smiling this time, though. That occurred 3 years ago. James informs me of family happenings, not that I bother to ask. Declared bankrupt was the once mighty Stewart Pharmaceuticals. My childhood home, a stately mansion, was sold at auction. In order to cover the costs of legal representation, Dad and Mom sold their luxury vehicles and Mom's valuable jewelry and downsized to a condo. At times, I recall the meal a long time ago when Dad referred to Zane as a fortune hunter. Funny how life has a way of revealing people's true selves. My respectable family lost everything due to greed and shortcuts, but my poor immigrant spouse amassed an empire through honesty and hard work. But guess what? I realized that money isn't the measure of true wealth. Having supportive individuals around you will cheer you on instead of bringing you down is key. If that's the case, I am the wealthiest lady on the planet.